Howdy, everybody. David here for this week's Griscom stream for Left Reckoning. Hope you are doing good wherever you are at. I'm doing mighty fine, if I do say so myself. Got some fun stuff coming up, hopefully in the next week or so. I've been working really hard on a piece on the Texas fence cutters, which listeners to Left Reckoning will know a thing or two about. One of these just really incredible anti-property revolutions that happened right here in Texas, but predominantly in my part of the state, Central Texas. So hopefully we'll be able to get that out pretty damn soon. I also think I'm going to be on the Jacobin Show, their YouTube channel, which y'all should certainly be checking out if you're not already following. Next week, talking about the question of patriotism and the left. I'm really looking forward to hanging out with Jen Pan and hopefully Kale as well about that. But yeah, y'all. We got some stories to get to today. Just a quick announcement, reminding folks that we're doing our second episode of Revolutionary Reckoning with our friends at This Is Revolution podcast. That will be coming up in just under an hour and a half at 8 p.m. Central. So if you haven't had enough of me by the time we log off, I might log off a little earlier than I usually do. You won't have to wait too long. I'll be joined by Matt, Pascal, and Jason. So that'll be a hell of a lot of fun. And reminding people, they haven't released the tickets yet, but we are doing our first live show, our first Left Reckoning live show. It's going to be a joint show with our good friends at This Is Revolution and Ben Burgess of Give Them an Argument. It's going to be in Los Angeles, California at the Telegram Room, the Telegram Ballroom. Tickets should be up this weekend. It's going to be a hell of a lot of fun. There'll be general admission tickets. And also, if people remember from the TMBS shows, we'll also be doing the kind of meet and greet tickets as well if people want to get there before the show and get introduced and spend a little bit of time with us before we go live. We're also going to be joined by Nando Villa and Anna Kasparian, and all that's going to be happening on October 23rd, one day before my 30th birthday. So it'll be pretty fun. I don't know if I've settled with the fact that I'll be turning 30 in California, but I think I'll be okay. But y'all should keep your eye out for those tickets. They'll be coming up soon. I really can't wait to see everybody again, man. I really missed doing those live shows. The live shows were the highlights of the year for me, really getting to meet everybody in person was such a treat. So keep your eye out for all of that. But yeah, as folks know, these are, Q&A sessions. So feel free to jump in with any questions that you do have or topics that you might want to hear us talk about. I do have a few things I want to do. Also, just reminding folks, I'm working on my new rig. My sister's helping me out as we speak because I promise folks I'm not going to be one of these people with a big set of books behind me. We're getting some cool stuff to put on these shelves, but it's going to be a little bit of a work in progress. But before we get to some of the stories I have, I'll go through the chat a little bit. Our friend Daniel Burton says, real quick, it's been a joy to watching everyone in Kristen Gonzalez's DMs freak out and ask the question, who would vote for a socialist? And the answer to that is, nearly 60% plus of the voting public there in New York. That was a really exciting victory, and we're still sort of basking in that. Very exciting. I mean, even the races that were lost in New York, devastating as they are, it's an exciting continuing march of progress that we're seeing in that part of the country. And I think that's a really damn exciting thing. And something we should be able to hold our heads up high about that. All the kind of structural and some of the political problems that we, that happen within this movement as it's growing. And I'm talking about the DSA here. We're seeing real results. And I think that people should sometimes remind themselves about what the goal is winning power. And there's some really damn good examples of that are coming out of New York right now. Really stoked that Kristen not only won, but really trounced Elizabeth Crowley there. It's something that's going to be really exciting to see what that coalition is going to be able to do in government, and now having Julia Salazar and Bridgeport being met by a few comrades in the state legislature up in New York, I think was going to be very beneficial for working people. And let's see. I'm going to be completely honest about the crypto stuff. As much as the criticism still hold, I have not been paying that much attention to it these days, because I think that it's been pretty battered publicly. But I guess they seem to have had another dip this week. And as Sune is reminding everybody, come visit us on This is Revolution and Left Reckoning. It's a joint production. You can watch it over on their YouTube channel or on ours in just about an hour at 8 Central. We're going to be talking about AMLO. Matt has a story. I know there's something about like California in general. It's always fun hanging out with those guys. So be sure to join us for that as well. And Jordan says, looking forward to seeing you all in LA now that I'm officially in North America again. Well, welcome back. And yeah, excited to see everybody out there. And our friend says Texans don't turn 30 outside of the state. Grace period till we get home. I appreciate that. That's probably the right way to think about it. I'm going to be going to a UT football game 1 week before my my birthday, so I think that might count. The Jake Fires experience, is any leftist politicians worth a shit here in Texas politics you would recommend learning about? I mean, it's complicated in the sense that, like, we're talking about, we could be talking about two different things. Like, are there things that I'm excited about seeing what they're going to be able to do? Absolutely. I think Michelle Viejo running in South Texas is a very exciting congressional race. She's a little bit of like a middle of the road progressive. Um, so it's not somebody who I necessarily see as like somebody holding the banner of working class socialist politics, but certainly if it's being put up against the right wing of the Republican Party down there, I think that that's something that's interesting to watch, especially because so much of the Texas Democratic Party, the cowards that they are, have been arguing that the only way to win and maintain power in South Texas is by putting up these kind of wishy-washy Republican-like Democratic candidates down there. So I think that that's something I'm looking at. I'm a big fan of Greg Casar. Not saying that there's not things that are upsetting there. I think it's a real shame what ended up happening with Greg and the DSA here in Austin, because Greg came up out of that movement and that system here. He was a really great city council member, and I think he's probably going to be one of the most pro-worker Congress people when he gets elected. He won the primary, and in his congressional district, he's going to win by a landslide. It's tough because, like, for the kind of things that we're advocating for, we like want people to be really deeply rooted in this movement that we're building. And because Greg has, not horrific, but unacceptable at the same time, opinions on Palestine and Israel, he asked to be not to be considered anymore for the DSA endorsement there. And I think that that was a really shameful moment. Not just shameful, but just disappointing moment, because so much work had gone into building up his rise from that movement. He was a really great avatar in a lot of other aspects, I think, for that kind of politics. But he's still somebody I'm very excited about to see what he's going to be able to do in Congress. But as to like what we're trying to build, I mean, we're still in a building phase that, like, we don't have these kind of tribunes that we want. So some things to think about. I might take a nibble at this. So this weekend, we're going to be releasing part 2 of our documentary on what was left populism, where we're sort of going through some of the history of the left and sort of using that to sort of set up our understanding of what the Bernie Sanders and the Corbyn movement and what the Syriza movement sort of represented. But I'll take a little bit of a shot at this question from Daniel here, who says, David, could you explain what the history between left populism and what's called the post-left, especially contextualized after the Bernie fallout? And I don't know. I'll keep my eye out as I'm going, if you want Daniel to maybe rephrase a bit of that, because I'm not 100% sure what movements you're talking about when you say post left, right? Because post left, like what that is, people who sort of claim that, that's like, random people online who aren't really involved in politics. And I'm not saying that your opinion doesn't matter if you're not involved in like the actual on the ground work. Um, but it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, some people have an opinion about things. I don't know how like important that is to like understanding like political movements, but left populism was this idea that you could create a political movement um, top down, right? The idea, at least with Bernie and Corbyn, was that by sort of having these figureheads, you could sort of revitalize left movements in both the United Kingdom and in the United States from the top down. Now, both Corbyn and Sanders were very adamant about the fact that this needs to be, um, that could be the shock to get things moving. But you absolutely needed to have that kind of coalition and movement that was sort of ending up leading it. But we saw that was, a bit limited in the long run, right? I mean, in the United States in particular, we're really dealing with the post Bernie fallout. I think a lot of people don't really know what to be doing next. Um, Now, to get into like the question of like left populism, and maybe in a way that I could speak to a little bit better, going to theory, there was this movement, and the intellectual kind of figures behind it were two folks. So we spent a lot of time reading. Was very inspired by, for a while, Chantal Mouffe and Ernesto Laclau, who wrote a few books on the question of left populism, and sort of operated from this terminology that they use called post-Marxism, where their thesis was that Marxism had failed to produce the results that it had intended because it had an incomplete theory of politics. And for them, they argue that um, rather than having a movement that is sort of like the classical, and this is also very vulgar, but like classical Marxist understanding of, the proletariat sort of rises up, the working class sort of rises up, takes state power and creates some form of socialism. They said, well, the fact that that hasn't happened in so many places, and then where it did happen, it devolved into, undesirable, um, though with a lot of benefit for people. We're talking about things like the Soviet Union, for example. But in the Soviet Union, you also have this crisis where there's this lack of democracy, right? So you're getting a lot of the programs and systems that are helpful for people, but the ability of people to interact and affect the system that's sort of ruling over them was extremely limited. And the reason for that was because, um, as I say in the documentary, there was this thesis that capitalism in the early 20th century was like in this final crisis, and all the Soviet Union had to do was like hold out until the global revolution happened. And as we know now, that didn't end up happening. So that system had a lot of contradictions and tensions within it. What Moof and Laclau do, though, instead of like looking at how can we build up working class movements across the globe, they say, well, what we need to do is have a more holistic approach. And instead of it just being solely working class politics, we're going to have a constellation of different social movements, right? And that general constellation, that general coalition, that progressive coalition will be able to overcome the systems and the forces that stand in front of it. It sounds really nice as a theory. That's why it was attractive to a lot of academics, particularly after the Soviet Union fell. And I will also, give Laclau in particular a lot of credit. When he first started saying that populism is what's coming globally, he was saying that at the height of neoconservatism, right? The invasion of Iraq by the United States, at a time when everyone was like, neoconservatism, that's like the movement that we have to be worrying about, thinking about how we can sort of confront it. Um, and Laclau at that moment was like, populism is what's coming. And he ended up being right, that there was going to be some kind of general sense of elite versus the people politics that was going to end up dominating both the right and the left. The problem with there's a lot of problems, and I'm just doing a quick run through here. If you really want to spend some time with this, we had Lillian Churchia, who was also our guest this week on the show, to talk about post-Marxism. You can search on YouTube, Left Reckoning, post-Marxism, and we talk about it way more in depth than this. But the problem with that is that, one, you don't have a rootedness in the class. Class composition has decayed tremendously in the United States and in Europe. And I mean by that, like, class consciousness, but also class rooted organizations. Um, Without that, you don't have the same mobilizing effect that you need to make a kind of successful anti-capitalist revolution or anti-capitalist movement successful. And also, when you're sort of sprinkling in all of these different movements, um, they don't last, right? You have to constantly be reconstituting the social bloc that is sort of fighting for your politics. And we've seen real tremendous failures with that. Another example of this is like, Podemos is like the closest to their theories, and I mean that solely because Pablo Iglesias, who ran Podemos, was a student of Chantal Mouffe's. um, but Syriza is a very good example of this. And let me give you a quick example and maybe see what other people think, so I can sort of springboard off of that. But um, in Syriza, you have this coalition, and Syriza meant like the coalition of the radical left. So it was supposed to be picking up all of these different movements. So not only just like the older socialist movement and the working class movement, but also the kind of general, more broad progressive movement. And they had extremely radical plans. And they had a strong critique of the European Union. They had a strong critique of the situation in Greece. And again, for people who don't understand or don't know the history of Greece in recent years, Greece is a member of the European Union. It's a poor country, and because of the fact that they are operating on the euro system, the country had a prolonged period of stagnation and economic crisis because they weren't able to control their own currency, which meant that the government was extremely limited in its ability to provide for social programs. So they were in a constant state of stagnation. And because of the European Union's economic controls, they were getting bailed out by the ECB, the European Central Bank. And with that, the European Central Bank says, well, you got to do this. You got to cut social programs. You got to sell off public land. You have to do all these things. Austerity, right? So Syriza comes into power with this very strong leftist anti-capitalist criticism of of um, of neoliberalism, of the European Union, etc. But when it came time to actually have that final conflict with the European Union, there's a very famous moment where the ECB said, "Here's our bailout package. You have to accept it." And in Greece, they held a vote to either accept or reject that bailout package, and the people overwhelmingly said no. Right? They said they will not accept another bailout package. But the real crisis of this is that there was no real structure in that country that had been developed to hunker people down for what was coming. Because while theoretically you can make the argument, and I would agree with it, is that like what Greece needed to do is leave the European Union. um, what that would have meant, particularly in the short term, it would have been a massive economic crisis, because capital is going to leave. All the people with money are going to take money out of the Greek economy. There was going to be an even more prolonged economic crisis there. And there weren't the kind of social institutions in that country that had prepared them for it. Now, a lot of times when people talk about Syriza and Greece, um, it's all about Tsipras, who was the PM, and it's sort of like, oh, well, he didn't have enough backbone. Fine, whatever. If that's where you want to operate, we can have that conversation. But I think that's extremely limited, because the point is that there weren't good options at that moment for them. And like, even if they had sort of gone through with refusing the bailout and dealing with the economic warfare that would have come after that, what that would have meant was that a continued economic crisis for people in Greece. Certainly the end of Syriza, which ended up happening either way. The point was, is at that moment, the board had already been set, and the end result of that political movement was sort of in front of them. Um, another example maybe that might be a little bit more clear to folks is that like the education minister in Greece had this very radical plan that's like, we're going to use the schools, the actual like infrastructure that we have, the buildings that we have, and use those as centers of like worker collaboration, workers education, and working class politics. So after school's out, working class people, unions, etc., could come and use those system, that like literal building to do, you know um social events, political events, etc. But the problem is that when Syriza came into power, they pulled up almost all of the members of the party into government, and they didn't have a lot of connection with the social base, with the social movements in that country. That they were saying like, please come and use this, but they didn't have anybody to call directly, basically. That's the kind of structural failure that happens when you are doing class focused politics instead of class rooted politics. And like the big shift that we need to be doing right now was building up a real class rooted organization that then can come into political power, rather than after the fact trying to top down create class rootedness from like a government structure or like an institutional structure like that. So I know that was a long winded version of sort of talking about left populism, but I bring that up to say, like, here's two different examples. Corbyn, Bernie lose. They revitalized a lot of people. They set off a lot of political movements and excitement, and it was a worthwhile gambit. But there's a tension there. There's an issue there with that strategy. And then the other example is like, unlike Corbyn and Bernie, a kind of radical left populist party ends up winning. But because of the structural issues that went into that coalition in the first place, when they came into power, they weren't ready to do the very difficult work. They weren't capable. It's not even ready. Like they weren't capable of doing the very difficult work of changing the nature of the state, changing the nature of working class people's relationships to the state. Um, so these are really dire lessons for us to learn right now out of power, as we're trying to rebuild and come up with a new way to get ourselves onto the level of national politics. How can we have a movement that is capable in that moment of coming to power? And I know people who listen to the show know I make this example a lot, and I'm sorry, but it's a worthwhile one to reiterate. Bernie Sanders always said, not me, us. When I could become president, I'm going to need y'all, to be able to wage war on the social level, to be out there in the streets, to be supporting of this movement, because just winning state power isn't enough, which is the correct analysis. But I don't think anyone really took that challenge very seriously. And what we really need to be doing is building up the political movements and institutions. So when we do get an opportunity to maybe get state power again like that, um, we have the capacity and the ability to actually implement our politics. But anyways, there'll be more coming out on this weekend for patrons. Um, Ty, appreciate the super chat. Says, can we trick Biden into doing other good things by utilizing dark brand and memes? I don't think so. I mean, I I think Biden has some better instincts than um some Democratic Party politicians, but he's still a coward, and he also still is completely beholden to private interest. I mean, even like this, student loan relief, while welcome, comes nowhere close to actually tackling the crisis of student loans in this country. And what you see from Biden is he's reacting to social pressure and years and years of social movement pushing for debt relief. He ran on something completely different than what he ended up doing. And I don't think that I don't think that we should stop continuing to build movements that out of power can influence those folks in power. I don't think it's going to come out of memes. But I also think people should know that you're going to get, a much smaller version of what you're demanding from people like Joe Biden and president. Um, Daniel says, I was reading Ben Burgess's piece in Jackman about right-wing social democracy, and I recalled when I discovered the bellows via TMBS. Remember the bellows guys used that umbrella term. So do you mean left populism, or do you mean right-wing social democracy? I mean, the bellows got very weird very quickly. Uh, and actually hilariously because of Michael. The two guys founded it, and one of them was very mad at Michael for um, that Michael was promoting some of the early pieces that came out in the original Bellows. Um, but I don't know. I mean, I'll definitely do more in left populism. I don't know if we're talking about the same thing, and I know that was an old message, so maybe there's more coming up. All right, I'm coming down, and then we have some more. Our friend Marcos in the Twitch chat, the Brazilian says, David, do you think it's worth the time to have a strategy for the 2024 election? I know main focus should be to build a strong labor movement and expand DSA, but was wondering if it's important to push for Bernie again. I mean, we talked about this a lot. Ben and I had a friendly debate on this. I think that it is much more important to be building a strong labor and like an institutional, like strong, structured, organized left in this country. I think that that's like the main hurdle that we have in front of us. I sort of tacitly supported Bernie 24. I have some qualms with it and some worries about where that's going to go, particularly in demoralizing people. I think it's also very bad that a lot of American leftists have a hard time thinking about national politics outside of presidential elections. But I always maintain that my argument for Bernie, maybe running again 2024, just to block anybody like a Ro Khanna or a Jayapal or somebody like that who might want to try to capture some section of that movement. It'd be worthwhile to have Bernie again doing that, just to prevent anyone else sort of taking that movement, whatever sections would go with them, and sort of trying to reincorporate them into the Democratic Party. But yeah, that's sort of my general thoughts on about right now. Let's see. So we have a couple stories we want to get to. Yeah, and Daniel clarifies later. I meant like the post left. I don't. For me, I don't see anything other than Twitter online stuff about that I like. I don't have much more analysis of that than maybe personal psychological ones. Well, I want to come back to some questions. Again, reminding folks in just less than an hour, we'll be on with, we're going to be doing another joint show with our friends at This Is Revolution podcast. But I want to bring up a couple Texas stories right quick, because let's start with the most harrowing and devastating of them, um, which is that, here in Texas, officially, it's been coming for a while. Um, but the right wing got their wish. The trigger law that was put forward a long time ago, a few months ago, has now gone into effect. And Texas is now the largest state to restrict abortions and now has 3 significant bans on the books, setting up a potential legal minefield. Performing an abortion is now a felony punishable by up to life in prison in Texas after the state's trigger law, which has only narrow exceptions to save the life of a pregnant patient, went into effect Thursday. The law was triggered when the United States Supreme Court issued its judgment in Dobbs v. Jackson, the case that overturned Roe v. Wade and allowed states to set their own laws about abortion. Abortion clinics across Texas had already stopped performing the procedure, fearing prosecution under state laws that were on the books before Roe v. Wade. And I mean, I know it only means so much, but it's it's a difficult, extremely difficult moment. I mean, just thinking about all the people that I know and love around me, many of whom have had to, for whatever reason, have an abortion procedure. To think of the millions of people in Texas now who are directly affected by this, it sometimes boggles the mind. I mean, we've been prepared for this. We've been watching it happen in slow motion for a while, but it's sometimes hard to wrap your head around, just how serious and how devastating all of this stuff is. And like, yeah, fuck the right wing and Paxton and Abbott and all these characters who have pushed for this monstrous law. But I just can't. My anger to them is already at 100%. I am endlessly frustrated with the fact that you have a Democratic president, that you have Democratic control of Congress, and there has not been a more serious attempt to try to prevent this Armageddon kind of situation that's happening in Texas, and not just here, all across the South. Um, that is now preventing people from having access to very, very basic, safe, um, and perfectly moral medical procedures. The thing that gives me hope is what we saw in Kansas recently, where when that question was put to the people overwhelmingly said, no, we do not support an abortion ban in this state. I'm reminded, and I remind people constantly, that even in Texas, an abortion ban is extremely unpopular. Now, there's questions about at what stage they think abortion should be legal at. But the actual percentage of people who support a complete and total ban is a very, very marginal and a minority, even here in Texas. And it's very frightening to think that you live in a democracy where minority rule has become such a fact of politics. Um, there are attempts to push back on it here in Austin, for example, and it's not the only area. In Travis County, abortion has been decriminalized. So the city council here said the police and to the district attorney here, we will, you are not able to use resources of this jurisdiction to criminalize, pursue, or investigate people for getting a basic medical procedure like an abortion. But of course, that's limited because the state government is obviously very, very um, rabid about coming after folks. The law we have on the books in Texas, as we said earlier, making it a felony to to provide medical procedures to people, safe medical procedures to people, is insane. The $100,000 penalty on top of that is horrific. There are legal challenges because for people who paid a little bit of attention in civics class, that sounds like double jeopardy. Um, and there'll be challenges to the extent of the abortion law here in Texas. But until we have I don't have, concrete answers on like what we can do as individual members of this society right now, other than supporting people, trying to find ways to push back in whatever way that you can. Abortion groups are fighting to not only push back against the really nasty rules and the double jeopardy aspect of this law, but also on the clearly unconstitutional and illegal aspect and threat that has been put forward by people like Paxton here in Texas, where they are threatening to maybe come after people who are helping folks leave the state to get medical care, right? Which is a direct affront to your constitutional rights as a U.S. citizen, right? The state government should not be able to detain or prevent you from being able to go into other states, other parts of this country to provide to access medical care, but they are certainly trying, right? So other than supporting those efforts, what's frustrating to me about it is that we have like the material in the sense of where public opinion is on this question, but there is no vehicle that has presented itself right now that is strong enough to overcome the GOP stranglehold. And by vehicle right now, I'm talking about the Texas State Democratic Party, which their only plan is a slow march through state government here in Texas, maybe winning the governor's office, maybe winning a few seats in the state legislature. And I don't find that to be very viable because I have seen what the Beto campaign is. I have seen what the Texas State Democratic Party looks like and who they're trying to win and what they're trying to do. That I don't have a lot of confidence in their ability to overcome, decades of Republican control of government here. I'll tell you this. I'm not a big fan of the Democratic Party. I don't think that's any secret. I certainly would be much happier, and I would just in the sense of what that would mean for people when it comes to their rights to access healthcare in this state, would like to see Abbott lose and all that. But I'm going to tell you right now that the people who they're putting up, the way that they're running their campaigns, does not give me a lot of confidence in their ability to do that, and certainly doesn't give me a lot of confidence too in what that rule would mean. It certainly wouldn't be the kind of politics that we're pushing for, but potentially to be able to roll back some of this stuff that would be beneficial. But I don't see them constructing the vehicle on this. And what's so frustrating to me about it is that there is so clearly here in Texas and all across the country a popular mandate for the right to an abortion. There are people out there who are fervently against it, but the majority sits very clearly on the side that total bans on abortion like we have right now in the state of Texas are not what people want. And it's frightening and scary to live in a country that is a supposed democracy and see such an incongruency between popular will, popular opinion on a question, and legislation and law. We'll be trying to do more to cover that. If people want a longer, maybe a little bit more theoretical view of that, we had Lillian Churchill on the show this week to talk about how we got here. And, for people who are maybe tuning in for the first time, Lord in heaven, do I have some major criticisms of the fact that we got to this place that we got here in the first place, because this has been sitting over our heads for 50 damn years. But we're we're just in a rough situation, and like I want to be able to come on here and say, like, here's the thing that you can do, here's the group that you can donate to. There are plenty of groups that we can donate to, but like having the answer to how to get out of this right now, other than um building like the movement that we need to be building, I don't have it, because the people who most people assume are building that and are thinking about this have been sitting on their asses for decades and been very happy to, because it's meant more money. Every time that the Republicans came up and got really worked up about abortion and people got worried about it, it meant more money coming into the Democratic Party coffers. And they liked that. And they kept that going for years and years and years on end. And when it got really worrying, and you got in this moment where people were saying, remember in 2020, you have to vote for them. You got to do it. You got to show up for Biden. You got to come up for all these folks, because all these things are going to happen if we lose. And you do it, you show up, you vote for them, and they sit in power and they do jack shit. There's so much more that they could be doing to take this serious. Even short of maybe if you say, oh, they don't have the numbers in Congress to like pass a full on legalization of abortion. The executive branch is extremely powerful, and Biden has not been following through on the full powers of that office to really take seriously this crisis. I'm sorry. We've talked about it a lot. There are things that could be done. We're going to open up on all federal on federal lands in Texas and in all states that ban abortion clinics, because that procedure is very easy. It's very safe. It's not complicated. It's not dangerous. You could be providing that service for people, and they aren't. And look, obviously, it would be a big deal if they did that, right? But this is a big fucking deal and affects a lot of people, and their cowardice and their slowness on this is really unforgivable to me. Michael wants to know, what about the border states of Texas? What's the legal status there? Well, that motherfucker up in down by us in Louisiana, Democrat, signed an abortion ban in Louisiana, so procedures banned there. Arkansas, similar picture. Oklahoma, similar picture. New Mexico is where people are going. It's where most of the Texas abortion clinics went. So they closed up shop here in Texas and they went over the border to New Mexico. But as I said earlier, the state government of Texas is trying to explore options so that they can harass and terrorize women who are looking for basic medical procedures there. So there needs to be a much more robust protection of people in the immediate term from the federal government, to deal with that. And also, it's absolutely insane that somebody has to travel to New Mexico to get medical care. Insane. It's just unacceptable on its face. I'm happy to support it and to provide avenues for people so that they can get access to this kind of thing in the interregnum, in the in between period, but it's absolutely unacceptable on its face. Ironically, Ironically is the wrong word. Surprisingly, maybe in Mexico right now they have decriminalized abortion. So there's also the possibility of people going across the southern border to Mexico to potentially get basic health care. Jules said, Gris, how can people fight against the dark money that SCOTUS got payout of $1.6 billion from dark money, unelected clowns circumventing Parliament, Herculean fight? The only way to beat them is with proper organization. It's different circumstances, but look what happened in New York with the Gonzalez campaign. I mean, they spent insane amounts of money for Crowley, the rich and the powerful. And what did Gonzalez have that Crowley didn't? Was a social movement of people who are willing to go out and do the real work of politics, which is knocking on doors and talking to people and convincing them. That's the way to deal with it in the immediate term. John wants to know, David, did you happen to see the Cornell West interview with Mayim Bialik? Straight fire, in my opinion. I didn't. I'll check that out for sure. Our friend in Denton says, we are trying protest and local action here in Denton County. Have had small effect. Hopefully it snowballs. And I don't actually, you're so right to remind folks of this. Is like that kind of stuff is so important. I'm working on a piece. I hope it's coming out soon in Jacobin on the fence cutting wars here in Texas, which is just like a reminder that sometimes like the direct political electoral avenues are close to you, and you need to be using whatever tools are at your disposal. I'd always try to remind folks that like oftentimes we misremember the fight for abortion in this country. That one day the sweet and wise Supreme Court decided that they're going to legalize abortion in the United States. Bullshit. No, what happened was there was an incredible social movement that stood up against the right, stood up against the Christian conservatives and the state, and said, we're going to fight for basic health care for people in this country. And it was winning. And it seemed almost a no-brainer that eventually Congress was going to pass a national abortion, cement the right to an abortion in this country. But what ended up happening was the Supreme Court made its ruling, and then that momentum completely evaporated and stopped, and it sort of left that threat over our heads. And I think it's important, particularly in remembering the fight for abortion in this country, is that it didn't come up from up high; it came from below, and that's like the only way we're going to be able to win it back, I think. And Jake Fires also notes another ridiculous point about this state here. Many of my family members have had to drive to New Mexico for many different healthcare needs, as rural Texas is so woefully underserved. It's sad. And you know what's insane about that, Jake? I totally agree, and I hate those assholes like Crenshaw and Cornyn and Cruz when they start talking about rural Texans, because they have waged war on rural healthcare in Texas since the moment they came into political office. And you know but what's so insane about the fact that Texans are having to cross the border into New Mexico, and I love New Mexico. I'm not meaning this as an insult or anything like that. New Mexico is an extremely, extremely poor state, and there's a lot of parts of Texas that are extremely poor too. But Texas as a whole, as a state, is an extremely wealthy one comparatively. And it's insane to think that people are coming from a wealthy state like Texas and having to cross the border into a poor state to get access to healthcare. Let's see. I missed your question, Billy. Billy says, "What do you make of the transition of Chinese industry to meet domestic markets rather than international, and its implication on U.S. industry and the Western working class?" I mean, that's a great question. I don't have an answer for you, other than like this is sort of what happens when I think the Chinese recognized um, during Trump, and also like all this stuff was going on. Remember, when everyone's getting all worked about Trump's China policy? Biden has done almost nothing um, to alleviate and change that. In fact, the Biden administration and the Democratic Party have only worked to inflame tensions with China. Um, so, is it surprising that you see China's trying to take a much more internal view to their economy? Um, I don't know. It doesn't seem too surprising to me. Um, I think to give you like a good answer on that, I need to spend more time on it. But that's top line thoughts. It's certainly playing a big role in the U.S. economy, just in the sense that the United States economy has developed in such a way that it is extremely dependent on cheap goods, unfinished goods from China for production. Um, and scaling up takes a very very long time. Um, but I'd love to be able to do more on that. But that's all I got for you off the cuff. Zane said, "My sister's a public school teacher in Pflugerville, just outside Austin." I know Pflugerville. I guess you're saying that for everyone else. That's where I got my license. And she says the public education situation is bad there. She said her and her colleagues are constantly overworked. Yeah, I mean, that's what happens when you wage war on teachers, and it's disgusting. I'm sorry for your sister. And congressional baseball fan, our good friend in New Mexico, says, meanwhile, New Mexico, or in between New Mexico and Arizona, if I'm right. Meanwhile, New Mexico people have to sometimes travel from small towns to larger ones because there's simply not healthcare in the rural area. I mean, rural healthcare in this country is a real disaster, and that's why Medicare for all is a national issue. So I got to run because we're doing the show with our friends at This Is Revolution, but I put it in the title. So I do feel like I need to talk about it. I want to talk about this. So it keeps on getting bumped because we have a lot of things going on the show. But this was a piece in Gizmodo/Earther by Molly Taft that I think is pretty good. It's worthwhile to look at because this just shows what happens. A lot of times, a lot of left media makes a big deal about cable news. Cable news sucks. Fuck that. But honestly, like, you might need to give Matt and I a little bit of credit on this. Like, I think a lot of people sort of build up who do independent media, they build up their identity as like, we don't do corporate media, or we're against corporate media. Yeah, two middle fingers to corporate media, but like, I don't know. You're playing in the fucking simulation when you get too worked up about corporate media. Sometimes I think, but that being said, I don't know why I'm creating flame wars here. There is a crisis in journalism. The national media plays a huge role in it, but I think much more important and much more dangerous has been the evaporation and the destruction of local news in this country. If you are lucky enough to still have any kind of significant local news in your area, it is most likely corporate controlled. It is most likely aggregated, and you probably have a newsroom that is completely overworked. So we're not even talking about the personal character of people who are working in. Typically, you're having people who are trying to do 10, 15 beats, which is insane. Nobody can do that seriously. This is the best time in American history to be a corrupt politician in a small state in particular, because local news has been dying off because of consolidation and monopolization of news. And who fills in that gap? Corporate interests, either by sponsoring local news organizations, or in this case, by creating their own. This is a piece by Molly Taft. It says Chevron jumps into news desert with stories about puppies, football, and oil. Chevron sponsored Permian Proud is providing community news and corporate propaganda in one of Texas's most news-starved regions. At first glance, the story looks like something similar your aunt might post on her Facebook. Midland County judge pardons jaywalking puppy, the headline reads, with a photo of a startled-looking Pomeranian behind a microphone seemingly on the witness stand. The post details how a Texas judge found a dog underneath his truck in the parking lot of his courthouse and used social media to find the owner. But the piece isn't a quirky feel-good story from a local paper. According to data hidden on the site or provided in the site's social preview cards, the puppy article is written by Mike Aldax, a man who lives more than 1,000 miles away from Midland. The entire site is bankrolled by oil giant Chevron since 2014. Aldax has worked at San Francisco-based public relations firm Singer Associates, has also written for a Chevron-funded newspaper in California called the Richmond Standard. We actually covered that on TMBS. The new website called Permian Proud is another example in a long history of the oil giant using paid media to disseminate its message in crucial geographic areas, this time in the oil-rich Permian Basin in Texas. And Chevron is rolling out its site in one of the most local news-starved regions of a state that has seen one-third of its newspapers closed. And let's just take a look at this website. Molly Taft did an incredible job breaking this down, but as they say in that piece, this is a part of the state that has a lack of local news. So they're coming in and they're filling a demand, and they're filling it with that kind of bullshit Facebook stuff, whatever. If y'all like feel good stories, fine, but that's not the news. Um, here's their website. Midland College research team returns from Netherlands with data reef on coals. Gathering scheduled at site of planned memorial on third anniversary of mass shooting. They're talking and making it seem like this is local news. And to their credit, Chevron does not hide the fact that they're funding it. It's right there on the front page. But let's just take a look at what they're covering here. So you have community, right? And we'll come back to that second. You got sports, you got culture. All right. Oh, look, circus is coming to town. Heritage, a little bit of history. And let's look at industry for a second. Permian Basin International Oil Show donates $282,000 in scholarships. I mean, this is very clear what this is trying to do. It's corporate PR. But this is where it gets sinister. New solar energy field in Permian Basin to lower Chevron's carbon intensity. So this is a bullshit feel-good story where and this is something that's happening a lot with the solar industry. They're building up solar panels to fund, to power some of their operations in the Permian Basin so that they continue to extract oil from the ground and burn that and release carbon in the atmosphere, right? I mean, Chevron, it's a joke to talk about Chevron lowering their carbon intensity, right? I mean, this is one of the most carbon intensive companies on the planet, right? And is responsible for tremendous, not just emissions of carbon through producing oil and selling that, and then it goes on to be used, but what they're doing to the environment in the Permian Basin. I mean, from wells that are left unplugged, to the haphazard way that a lot of oil is produced, to releasing methane into the air, because it's not as profitable as the oil underneath it, right? Like, this is one of the most nasty and dangerous organizations in the country, and certainly in Texas. But look, a couple solar panels. In their one of their New Mexico facilities. So they're helping out the environment. And it's not the only one that's like that. If you go back to industry, they're doing this kind of bullshit greenwashing. Oh, look, Chevron Permian Basin operations is going to tap into more recycled water. Oh, that's great that they're using gray water. I mean, it's just complete bullshit here to try to present a narrative that Chevron cares about the environment. Chevron's looking out for folks. Permian Basin will play a central role in world's growing energy needs. For decades to come, oil and natural gas will remain critical to improving the quality of life worldwide. In the Permian Basin, where production forecasts to rise from the current 20% of all U.S. production to 60% by 2030, will be central to that. This is extremely dangerous stuff. It's way more dangerous when we're not building a very serious just transition and Green New Deal program in this country. But this is just like, it's meeting a lot of different factors, right? The disinvestment in local news, corporate control of our information, and this really nasty kind of greenwashing that has become a part of not only the oil and gas industry, but corporations like Walmart and Amazon. It's just a big reminder. So, like, I don't know. I'm happy that people support this program. I think we do a lot of good work and we cover a lot of stories. But people, I think, on our side should be should be equally concerned, if not more concerned, about the lack of local news and reporters in their community, because this stuff has serious consequences. Because who does have money to fund a media operation? Chevron. Um, Well, I would like to do more. I have more stuff to do on the grid. I do think I have to go because I'm going to be up in 30 with our friends at TIR. We're going to be talking about a few other things, but let me run through. I'll do a quick fire of any questions that I missed on our way out. I appreciate everybody. This weekend, part 2 of our video essay for patrons, What Was Left Populism, is coming out. Matt might make an appearance, I'm hoping. MDR with a timely reminder, and appreciate the super chat. Everyone, don't forget to visit the cross stream shortly after this. This is Revolution. See you all there. The Jake Fires experience. I was born in Odessa. The local news choices are horrible. Jake, do you remember driving through? If you go through Andrews County, there's that big ass sign out there that says, "In Andrews County, we believe in God and free enterprise." That's always one of my favorite things that I see when I'm driving out there. Let's see. Jake also notes oil rules everything into everyone. I worked as a welder for 5 years, and people consider any green initiatives or oil regulation as a direct assault on their livings. I mean, like, but that's the challenge. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't. That's the difficult reality that we're in. You can't tell somebody who's working in the oil industry to go get a job in solar where like the median salary is like $22 an hour, and people are gonna look at you like you're crazy. So like, I think rather than like getting worked up and shaming people is recognizing that people understand that those industries are trash right now and they need to be massively improved and unionized. You know, somebody I know here, Ryan Pollock, who's IBW lead organizer here in Austin. He got a Green New Deal style initiative endorsed by the AFL-CIO here in Texas, and that's an institution that has a lot of people who work in that industry. They recognize that oil and gas is going a certain direction. And they also recognize the people at the top don't give a shit about them. Perfect opportunity for us to be able to provide and promote our vision of what a transition would be. And it has to be a just transition, and not just as a political slogan, but as a commitment. And Congressional Baseball Fan says they're straight up gutting West Texas and Eastern New Mexico, and they're going to make it uninhabitable. Yeah, they've been working on that for a long time. Let's see. We're doing a joint stream again, reminding folks this is Revolution, and I appreciate it, Billy Big Bricks. Check out this Revolution after this for a joint LRTR show. We'll be on that in just a second. I think I'm going to have to run, but I'm going to get down to the bottom of this. I appreciate the super chat from a friend, Fancy Necrosi, says, the world is better off because you live. Keep up the good work. It is sorely needed. Well, you're much too kind. I do appreciate that very much. Since the oil stuff seemed to have hit a chord here, let me just, in closing, for people who might be newer to Left Reckoning and to my work, let me show you a piece I wrote for Jacobin magazine. Y'all probably know it. Because I do actually have to run. And I saw a couple questions or comments on this that I'd like to address. But since I have to go, if you want to hear more about the oil industry and what we should be doing with oil workers, I highly suggest you read this piece that I wrote for Jacobin called "Texas Shows the Pitfalls of Liberal Climate Politics." I talk about the just transition in there. I think that might be a good place to start to sort of get where we stand on that kind of thing. As always, I appreciate everybody so much. Reminding folks, we do have our merch at leftreckoning.com/store. You can get one of these hats. I do think that they are pretty damn nice. We also have the Big Tex Tank and the Left Reckoning on the Road t-shirt there as well. This weekend, for patrons, we'll be releasing part 2 of our video essay on the Corbyn Sanders movement, What Was Left Populism. So you get access to that for just $5 a month at Left Reckoning. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning. I think next week we're going to be doing a deep dive into Montana with Tom Winters, who ran a progressive campaign there. I'm really looking forward to that. And yeah, if you haven't had enough of me, in about 20 minutes, I will be joining our friends for a joint stream between Left Reckoning and This Is Revolution. So be sure to keep your eye out for that. It'll be on this channel in 20 minutes. So until then, everybody, I will see y'all Sunday in 20 minutes or next Tuesday for our main show. Take care and be well, everybody.